Hello, welcome to Oxford Heirlooms. In this video, we're going to begin to work on the waistband for the bloomers that buttons on to the shirt that we previously made. I've got my waistband piece, and before I start doing anything else, there are 4 buttons that go across the waist of the bloomers. And 2 of the buttons are on the side seams, and 2 of the buttons are kind of in the center of the garment. I sewed my buttons on at the point or the level that I was supposed to, but at the point where the entredo is behind it, so that I had some thicker material to sew the buttons to. Now what I want to do is, before I go any farther, let me fold this in half for just a minute, and I'm going to check from the center so that I can make sure that my buttons, okay, now they don't exactly line up. I need to, what I'm going to do, let me show you. I'm going to put with a little friction erasable, well no, I'm not going to do it with a friction erasable pen. I'm going to put a little line through these first 2 marks, and I'm going to center on the buttons one more time. Let me fold that in half so I can get the center of the buttons. That needs to be in by about 1/8 of an inch. Okay. All right, so I will know where to create my buttonholes on my waistband. Okay, so that way it'll be a smooth fit across the fancy panel of the garment. Okay, so that being done, I'm going to take my shirt and set it off to the side again somehow. All right, now from my waistband, this is the bottom inside of the waistband, and this is the bottom outside of the waistband. So my instructions tell me to iron one side of the waistband down 1/4 of an inch, and then create a seam in the back, forming a circle of fabric, and then fold the 1/4 of an inch back down again. Okay, so let me go to the ironing board and press the seam that will be the bottom of the inside of the waistband down by 1/4 of an inch and press it really well. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I've been to the ironing board and I pressed that one side of the waistband down by 1/4 of an inch. Now the instructions tell me to sew the center back seam, forming a circle of fabric, and then to press the seam open and refold the 1/4 of an inch down. So let me pin this into place. Open that up because I will sew it and then press the seam and then repress it down 1/4 of an inch. So I don't want to sew that folded. Okay, 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to go backward and forward a little bit at the top and bottom, just to tack the waistband together. Okay, now let me go back to the ironing board and press this seam open and then repress the top down by 1/4 of an inch. And then we'll move on. Okay, I've got that back seam, that center back seam sewn, and I have pressed it open and pressed it back down a quarter of an inch. Now, what I also did while I was off camera, along the bottom of the waistband piece, I've made a mark where it should line up with the side seam, the center front seam, and the other side seam, because now I need to, with my bloomers, the pattern tells me to sew 2 lines of gathering threads along the top of the shorts, starting at the center back, treating the lining and the outside as if it's one. Now what I'm going to do, before I start sewing my gathering threads, I'm going to pin each of the seams together, lining it up. Line up my center back seams. And then I'll put a couple of pins in along the top also. There's my last seam. Okay, because it tells me to sew my first gathering thread 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, and the next one 1/4 of an inch away from that. So just in order to keep the edges of the fabric together while I'm sewing, I'm putting these pins in. Okay, all right, let me change my stitch length to a basting stitch. And begin to sew my gathering threads at 1/8 of an inch from the top of the bloomer. Take my pins out as I come to them. Okay, this will take me a minute to get all the way around, along with sewing the second basting line. So I will finish this part off camera and I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my basting threads sewn on. Now I need to gather this until it fits the waistband piece. So I'm going to insert the bloomer into the waistband. I'm going to line up the front center seam with the blue dot that represents the front center seam, and put a pin in there. Then I'm going to come around to both of my side seams, line them up with the blue dot that represents the side seam, and put a pin in there. And I'm going to wait to pin the back seam, the back center seam, until after I pull the gathering threads. So let me line up this other side seam with the blue dot that represents the side seam. Okay, now one side at a time. Let me find the center back. Find the 2 basting threads that are on one side of the center back. Got a lot of threads back here. There we go. There. And I'm begin to gather going around the corner of the side seam. These don't gather really all that much. I was kind of surprised the first time I made these bloomers how very little it really needed to gather to create the bloomer effect. Okay, so this will take me a minute to gather this until it fits, and then I will pin it all along the waistband edge. Okay, now I've gathered it too much. So let me move my gathers. Until the waistband is the same size. Okay, there we go. And then I'll move my gathers so that they're evenly spaced along the waistband. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pin this front section. Just put a pin in about every 1 inch or every 1.5 inch. Okay, I'll finish my gathering off camera, but you can see what I'm doing. I'm gathering the fabric in between the side seams and the front seam, and then eventually I will gather the fabric between the back seam and the side seam, and I will pin that all the way along the waistband. Okay, I've got that waistband pinned on to the gathered bloomers all the way around. So starting, I guess at the center back, it doesn't really matter where I start. I need to, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I need to sew the waistband to the gathered bloomers. Taking my pins out as I come to them because I don't like to sew over pins. Now I have changed my machine back to a standard stitch because a minute ago I was basting and I had changed my stitch length to accommodate that. Okay, this is going to take me a minute to get all the way around the waistband, so I'll be right back. Okay, now it tells me I have finished, well, hold on a second. I have finished sewing the waistband to the gathered bloomers, and it tells me to trim my seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to start here at the center back and just simply cut off about half of that seam allowance. And I think the reason they ask us to do that is so that when we eventually sew the buttonholes on, all of this gathered fabric won't be where the buttonholes are. Okay, so this will take me a minute to get this seam trimmed to 1/8 of an inch all the way around, so I'll be right back. Okay, I've got that seam allowance trimmed to 1/8 of an inch, and then something that the pattern instructions don't tell me to do, but you know, I have done since about the second time I've ever made these bloomers, is I have pressed my waistband up, you know, with the seam allowance pressed towards the inside of the waistband. And the next step, you'll understand why that helps. Okay, now I'm going to turn the bloomers inside out with the waistband poking up. Now it tells me to, let's see, let me read this correctly, fold the waistband to the inside of the bloomers, with the folded edge just past the stitching line, and then press. Make the elastic casing in the back by stitching in the ditch of the bloomers and the waistband between the casing stitching lines. Okay, now I'm going to line up my center back seam. I see my sewing line. I'm going to go just past that sewing line and pin that into place. Just past the sewing line. And pin it into place. You need to be just past the sewing line because when you stitch in the ditch, you will catch the back of the waistband. Okay, I'm going to do this until I get around, let's see, okay, there's my waistband. I think I need to, there's my waist. See the lower of my two blue lines? This is my buttonhole marking, and this is where my casing will stop. Okay. So let me continue to pin this going around, and then we will stitch in the ditch. Let me get around here to the side seam. I didn't finish up on the other side. Okay, this will take me a minute to get this all pinned, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I have the folded edge pinned to just beyond the stitching line all the way around. I can still see my gathering threads, but I'll take them out in just a little bit. Now it tells me to press, I guess, this top seam. So let me go to the ironing board and press the waistband. All right, so I have the top of the waistband pressed. Now is when I need to make this elastic casing, which will go from the dot to the other dot over near the other seam. Now it says to stitch in the ditch, which means that, let me see if I can zoom in. Okay, I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to drop my needle where I literally go into the seam between the bloomers and the waistband. And I'm going to stitch very slow so I can follow that line. And I'm going to do something that I very seldom do. I'm going to be sewing over my pins. I really dislike sewing over sewing pins, but in this case, I feel like I need to keep that waistband pinned into place underneath. And I also need to follow the seam line from the outside at the same time. And then when I get this finished, we'll have a moment of truth as to whether or not I caught the waistband underneath all the way from dot to dot, you know, creating a casing. Okay, I'm going so slow. This is going to take me a little bit of a hot minute to get this done. So when I finish stitching in the ditch, we will stop and we will, well, I can see it here. I am catching just the edge of the waistband from the back. So I think this is going to work out, but I do need to keep my pins in there. I need to sew slowly because hopefully if I go slowly, my sewing machine needle will glide past a pin as opposed to hitting the pin and potentially breaking, or breaking the pin for that matter. So I'll be right back. Okay, I have finished stitching in the ditch from point to point, and as I check the inside of the waistband, hooray for me, I did catch the bottom edge of the waistband on the inside all the way along, so I don't have any holidays. Good. Okay, now it tells me to top stitch all the way around the top of the waistband, a scant 1/8 of an inch from the top edge to keep the elastic from twisting. So I'm going to start from the center back and just a scant 1/8 of an inch, just leaving enough for my 3/4 inch elastic to go in there. I'm going to top stitch all along the edge of the waistband. So this means that I'm doing both the front and the back at the same time. I only did the stitch in the ditch along the bottom of the waistband in the back. Okay, this is going to take me a minute to get all the way around the waistband, so I'll be right back. Okay, so I have my top stitching done, a scant 1/8 of an inch from the top. Now, it says for me to cut a 3/4 inch elastic according to the table. So I've got my 3/4 inch elastic, and I'm going to cut it according to the length, according to the size that I'm making. There we go. Put the rest of my elastic out of the way. Okay, now, since I have already stitched in the ditch and formed the casing on the bottom and top stitched along the top, where the elastic has to go in, I'm going to take my pins out. Now, I'm going to leave my pins in the front of the waistband because in a little bit I'm going to have to stitch in the ditch to hold the front of the waistband into place. Okay, now once again, I can't use my loop turner to feed the elastic through here, so I'm going to put a safety pin on it. And remove one. I'm going to start from one side of my elastic casing. I'm going to remove one pin from the front, and I'm going to feed my elastic through the back casing, and it just fits. It's a little bit snug, but it'll do. And I'm going to feed it through until I get to that about 1/4 of an inch from that, wait a minute, this blue dot, and that's the buttonhole mark. So when, as a matter of fact, I think what I'm going to do, since I'm feeding it in from this side, I'm going to mark on the inside. Also, let me mark the other side too. Let's see, where is that? There's the spot. So it needs to be right there. Okay. So let me continue to feed my elastic through. When I get to that center back seam, I'll just keep going, open up the seam. If I can do that with the safety pin, I may need to. There we go, got past it. Okay, this will take me a minute to feed this elastic through and get to this point where I can tack it down, so I'll be right back. Okay, I've got this elastic fed through on one side. You can see where I fold it there. It's about 1/4 inch to the right of that little blue dot, but it's not where the buttonhole will need to go. So I'm going to stop feeding elastic for just a minute and tack this elastic into place at that blue dot by going forward and backward a few times. There we go. Okay, now I can feed the rest of the elastic through without worrying about it getting caught. Okay, I'm going to pull it. Let's see. It is now, I've got to get in here and remove my pin. Let me pull the elastic a little bit where it's beyond that dot. Come in here and remove my pin. And carefully, once again, this time I'm just about 1/4 inch to the left of the blue dot, but not where the buttonhole marking is going to go. So let me go forward and backward and tack this down. Okay, so the elastic is in the casing and it is stitched into place. Now I need to finish this waistband part of the bloomer by stitching in the ditch along the front. Now right here near the elastic casing where I took the silk pins out in order to get the elastic in there, I'm going to put my silk pins back in to hold that bottom of the waistband into place, and then I will stitch in the ditch from the front and stitch all the way around from casing line to casing line in the ditch. Let me lower my needle to make sure I'm going in the seam and not missing it. Keep that seam straight. And once again, I'm going to be sewing over pins, which I really don't like to do, but in this situation, I think it's best that I do it. Just go slow so that you will glide. If your needle gets close to the pin, it will hopefully slide next to the pin and not just capture it directly and either break the needle or break a pin. Okay, so this will take me a minute to get this stitching in the ditch completed because I'm going slow because I'm trying to make sure I'm following my seam. So I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my stitching in the ditching. I'm making a joke. My stitch in the ditch is completed, and as I check the inside, let me carefully cut that thread. I have cut the bottom of the waistband all the way along. Okay, so that's good. I don't have any holidays. So let me remove my pins. And then I need to use my seam ripper. Let me turn the bloomers back right side out. We can still see this bottom basting line, so I'm going to use my seam ripper and remove that basting thread. Just pull it out all the way along the edge of it. I think I can pull it in one long piece if I'm kind of careful, because it went all the way around the edge. There we go. And then I'll reach inside and grab the bobbin thread and pull that out too. Okay, now I'm ready to start working on my buttonholes for the front of the bloomer. And we're just about finished and ready to button this onto the shirt and call the outfit for the older brother, call it a day, and start to work on the diaper cover and the bonnet for the baby brother who's going to come and make his appearance sooner rather than later. Okay, one thing that I'm going to do is I want to make sure that my buttonholes are the same distance away from the top of the seam. Now my seam is right at 1 1/8 of an inch, and my buttons are 5/8 inch buttons. So with my friction erasable pen, I'm going to put a little dot 1/4 of an inch from the top of the waistband at each of my buttonhole locations. And that way I can make sure my buttonholes, they're not too close to the top of the waistband and they're all equal distance from the top of the waistband. Okay, so in the next video, I'll be at my vintage Singer sewing machine making some buttonholes, but we are just about finished with this project. Thank you.